In this video, we are going to take a closer look at how to summarize what we read, which is an important ingredient in your first essay, the summary response.
Now, if you took 1101 recently, you likely had to write a summary in your analytical response to a text paper. If so, this should sound familiar, but it doesn't mean we all can improve upon our summarizing skills. Not every paper that you write will need to have a summary of a source, but it's an important skill to have. Our textbook, The Norton Field Guide to Writing, stresses the idea that all academic writing is part of a larger conversation to which you are adding your own voice. But before adding your own voice, you need to understand and show that you understand the voice you're responding to, the writers who have come before. So summarizing a source helps you to check your own understanding of your sources, and then helps your reader to understand those sources better too. In any paper you write, never assume that your reader knows what you know and has read what you've read. So in this paper, I want you to specifically imagine that you're writing for a reader who has not read the article you've chosen. So you need to break down the basics of the article for them before you can talk about your thoughts on it. Otherwise, the reader won't understand the points that you're trying to make. For this paper, your summary should be its own separate paragraph that comes after the introduction. Keep it short, 100 to 200 words. I knew I said this was a 700 to 1,000 word paper, and that does mean that the biggest part of your paper is not the summary. It's you and your response to the article that you've read. The summary comes before that. It does its job, and then it gets out of the way so that you can really become center stage. So what does your summary need in those 100 to 200 words? Well, you need to, in your own words, capture the author's thesis or central argument. They may not have a handy thesis statement like we try to write in our papers, so you as a reader need to look at the article carefully and decide, okay, what is their main point, right? Express that to your reader, and then also build on that with some of the major supporting points. You don't want to get lost in the details. You don't want to load your summary with quotations. This is really just a basic roadmap to your reader of what the article is about. And then in the response section of your paper, you can get into the details that really interested you. Your summary should be neutral. This is like the back of a book cover. What is it about, right? Don't yet give your opinions, simply the facts. And then in the response section, you will be providing your thoughts, your opinions, the I part of the paper. Right now, stay neutral, stay within 100 to 200 words, and then you'll get to move on. So let's take a look at the screen time reading as an example. And again, if you haven't yet read the screen time article I've linked on this page, you'll want to make sure that you do that first so that this will hopefully make more sense how we're approaching it. So the screen time essay, the subtitle reading conclusions about the effects of digital media are often incomplete, irrelevant, or wrong. It does give us a pretty good sense of its argument right from the title there. But whenever I read something, I make sure to take stock of a few key elements before I read. So this helps me evaluate the article better, and you might consider this approach to the article that you end up writing about in your paper. So if you learned about a rhetorical analysis in ENC 1101, this is where we're talking about ethos, the credibility of a writer. Later in this semester, as we work on research projects with multiple sources that you will need to find on your own, it'll be very important to consider these questions. Now, since I chose the screen time article for you, and I also chose the list of articles that you can pick for your essay, I did already pre-vet them and decided that they're credible. but it doesn't hurt to practice asking and looking for the answers to these questions. Mainly, after you figured out the main point of the article, who are the authors, right? Are they qualified to speak to this? Have they previously been published? Where is this article published? What's the reputation of the publication? And then what do you already know or have you heard about concerning the topic this article deals with? And that might set up for you an expectation of that what the article might, be discussing, debating, and then you can judge it better from there. So let's take a look at the screen time article. All right, so if we take a look at this article, screen time conclusions about the effects of digital media are often incomplete, irrelevant, or wrong. So this was published earlier this year, back in January, and we can see that our authors handily have their qualifications listed right here. So this article is written by 3 professors: Byron Reeves, professor of communication at Stanford; Neelam Ram, who is a professor of human development and family studies and psychology at Penn State. And then we have Thomas N. Robinson, professor of pediatrics and medicine at Stanford. So we've got some big name universities here, people from a diversity of fields that could speak to different elements of, concerns about screen time from a psychological perspective, from the concerns about children in particular, which seems to be, as I'll talk about a little bit later, one of the biggest concerns when we talk about screen time. And then also with the professor of communication, somebody who studies likely the way that we make use of media and some of likely the positive uses that this article makes mention of as well. So as far as our authors go, I now have a pretty good sense, and I could read more about them if I click on these links. I could research them if I want to, more than what we need to do for today. But I can see who they are and I can judge their credibility. I can also take a look a little bit more if I haven't heard of the publication. So The Conversation, some of you might be familiar with this website. If you're not, it's actually a pretty interesting source for, as they say, academic rigor with journalistic flair, meaning that a lot of their articles are written by academics, professionals in various fields, but they write in a way that is conversational, that is meant to be more accessible to the public. And that is why several of the possibilities, your list of choices for this essay, are articles from The Conversation. I found that there are a lot of great dialogues happening on this website about, as you can see, science and technology, as well as a number of other issues and even COVID-19. So I encourage you, check out The Conversation. This could be a place that might spark some curiosity for you and maybe future ideas for your final paper, but we don't need to think about that just yet. So now that we've established who the authors are, we can kind of preview the article. I like to do this before I read, look at the subheadings. It might give me a sense of what to focus on as I read. And then I always like to see, okay, how long is this? How much time do I need before I start reading? So this article is about the same length as all of the articles I've given you as choices to write about for your essay. And so I'm trying to keep everything relatively equal as far as length goes at this point. As you research your own sources for papers later in the course, we will be delving into more strictly academic articles that are a bit lengthier, do involve more research, but I think this is a good place to start with something written by academics, but meant to be very accessible to all of us. So my job now becomes to read my article closely and write my summary. Obviously, from the title, screen time conclusions about the effects of digital media are often incomplete, irrelevant, or wrong, and that gives me a pretty good sense of their argument. But now I'm reading to see how they support that title, that statement, to challenge some of the popular fears about screen time. I need to read the article carefully, take notes, and then write my summary. You don't have to follow the method I'm going to show you here, but it's one I've suggested to students in the past and sometimes practice myself. And this is when for each paragraph or a couple of related paragraphs in a row, when I read something, I write a 1 to 2 sentence summary of the information I learned. And so that's for every paragraph or every couple of paragraphs in an article. So depending upon the length of the article I've read, at the end, when I look at my notes, I might have a paragraph or several paragraphs worth of notes that I took. Now, since this is a short article, when I take notes on it, I probably have about 100 to 200 words of notes, which is the exact length of the summary you need to write. Now, I can't just copy paste my notes into my essay and call it a day. It's probably going to read pretty choppy because it was just my notes. I wasn't writing them for anybody else. It's not written with transitions or pretty prose. And some of my notes might also be repetitive. Some might be interesting but not necessary for my reader. I'd have to take a look at my notes and consider what actually needs to go into my summary paragraph. It might be worth trying out this method, though, of writing a 1 to 2 sentence summary for each paragraph or so of something that you're reading. So I want to just briefly take a look at how I've been using Hypothesis, the Chrome extension that I gave you some information about in this week's module, to help me take notes on my screen as I read screen time. So let's take a look. I want to show you quickly how I'm using Hypothesis to take notes on things that I read online. I think which is pretty handy because I'm someone who, when I read a book, a paper book, I am underlining, highlighting, writing in the margins, and that's not always as easy to do online. You have to open up another document and write notes, copy paste things, make sure you remember that you copy pasted it and it's not your own words. So I think that this Hypothesis app, which is totally free, and I am not a spokesperson, I'm just excited about it, is pretty helpful. So once I've installed it as an extension, I always have the option up here to turn it on and off. So right now it's inactive. I just click it, and then I am able to, as I read, highlight things. You can see that my highlights have shown up, and then I'll be able to make notes and view notes that I took in the past. So what I can do here, I can also switch off my highlights when I just want to read without being interrupted by the things that I noticed before. But I turn it back on here, and I can click, and you'll see my notes, right? So I said that a good note-taking strategy to help you summarize is every paragraph or so to write a sentence or two that summarizes what you've read. And that can end up building to an overall article summary, right? That you can then polish and revise to turn into the summary for your actual paper. Now, an example of a bad summary would be me just writing something like, this paragraph is about scientific data. Well, yes, it is. The topic sentence tells me that, but I need to be a bit more detailed. Now, this topic sentence alone, as a good topic sentence should, and you should keep this in mind for your own paper, tells us what the paragraph is about. Scientific data, however, often fail to confirm what seems true based on everyday experiences. Now, that refers back to the previous paragraph, what seems true, that the effects of digital media is huge and can contribute to addiction, depression, health issues, the things that a lot of people are concerned about. So that's the talk that we have about digital media, but the scientific data our authors are arguing doesn't actually confirm that. So this paragraph is going to discuss the lack of data to support the things that we publicly debate about and often fear about digital media's influence over us, specifically the dangers of too much screen time. So if we want to look at it from a purely scientific point of view, these authors would like to show us that maybe there's not as much to fear, or at least there's not proof yet that is conclusive. So if I want to summarize as I read then I need to get into a bit more detail than just saying, oh yeah, that paragraph talked about data. So a better summary of what I read here is, while many people seem to think screen time is inherently bad, actual scientific data doesn't confirm this. So that is something that when I look back over my notes is helpful. I've captured basically 3 paragraphs worth of information into one sentence. And that could possibly be pulled into my summary in my paper if I were to write a summary response paper about this article. And so I'll give you another example here. I'm going to click on this. So several paragraphs here that I found interesting and I wanted to summarize. So for short paragraphs like this, you normally don't want to write one sentence, one sentence, one sentence, right? You can read through and decide, okay, these paragraphs are all building toward the same idea. How would I break it down into a 1 or 2 sentence summary for my benefit? Because it helps me show that I've understood this information, and it will also help my reader when I write about this article. So I said, digital media plays a huge part in our lives, but it's difficult to determine if that's good or bad because the kinds of media we engage with are diverse, and so is how we use that media, right? So that captures this part of the author's argument. Now, this isn't necessarily my opinion. This is me summarizing the opinion of these 3 authors. So I could go through the rest of the article and do that. And then I could look at those notes to help me, if you were doing this to study for a test, whatever your usage is, you might try out hypothesis. But I think for this class, as you're reading articles online, conducting research later in the semester that is going to be necessarily online, that might be a useful tool for you. At any rate, what I've shown you here is that when you read, you can take notes on the paragraphs that will help you write your summary. So when it's time to write my summary that I would put into my summary response essay, I can look back over the article and any notes I took about it and decide what are the essential things that my reader needs to know. I want something short and to the point, between 100 and 200 words, that captures the main ideas, enough that my reader can nod their head and say, oh, okay, that's what these authors think about screen time, and this is why they think it, right? So let's take a look at a possible summary. Professors Reeves, Rahm, and Robinson propose a major research initiative focused on collecting data in more depth and with more detail about how people use digital media. While the authors acknowledge that digital media has a significant impact on daily life, they question the assumption that digital media is largely harmful, claiming that studies do not support this notion. The authors assert that readers too often use screen time as a measure of how much people use digital media without specifying how the screen time is being used. They advocate studying individual users' precise media habits to better understand how digital media affects people. And this summary actually comes from a site that you may have used before in some of your classes that the library provides us access to online called Gale in Context, Opposing Viewpoints. And when we do some of your own research this semester, I will guide you through how this website can be useful to you, because that's actually how I found this article. And they provided this great summary that told me, oh yeah, that article sounds cool. And that's basically what you want your summary to do, is to give your reader a sense of an article you've read enough that they can continue to read your opinion and understand where you're coming from. That this was what you read about and here's your opinion on it. That's what we want our article summary to do. Something I want you to take notice of here that I talk about in the modules is using signal phrases to indicate that you are summarizing the beliefs of these authors and not giving your own opinions. So you can use these phrases in your summary, and you should also use them in the body of your paper after this when you might be quoting or paraphrasing things that the authors say. So notice these verbs I've highlighted. The professors propose, and then I summarize their proposition. The authors acknowledge that digital media has a significant impact. They question, they assert, they advocate. So we call these signal phrases. They signal to your reader that these ideas belong to somebody else. And then throughout the response section of your paper, it'll be clear if you use these kinds of phrases and quotation marks when necessary that, okay, that's the author's opinion, and then I can distinguish yours a lot better. So this is an important thing to take note of. In the modules, I go over this on the quoting and citing section, but that's something you want to make sure you're practicing in your essay, and I'll look for in your draft as well. Now that I've established my summary, I think this one does a pretty good job. This summary is 104 words, right? So it's at the minimum end of what I said you should do for your article. So I don't think we need more than this. If there are interesting details that I would want to discuss in my paper, I save those for the response section, the place where I can really sink my teeth in and talk about the parts of the article and this issue of screen time that I want to focus on. The summary has done its job.